Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new Redefining Security podcast. Have you ever thought that we are selling cybersecurity insincerely, buying it indiscriminately, and deploying it ineffectively? Perhaps we are. So let's look at how we can organize a successful InfoSec program that integrates people, process, technology, and culture to drive growth and protect business value. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
Pantera, the leader in automation security validation, allows organizations to continuously test the integrity of all cybersecurity layers by emulating real-world attacks at scale to pinpoint the exploitable vulnerabilities and prioritize remediation towards business impact. Learn more at pantera.io.
Everybody, you're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining Cybersecurity here on ITSP Magazine. This is Sean Martin, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you on joining me again today as we explore the world of operationalizing security in a way that not just protects the business from risk, but actually helps them grow and protect the revenue they generate as well. And there's a lot in making that happen, looking at two sides of the same coin in many cases. And today, one of the coins popped up on my LinkedIn feed, as it often does, that triggers something for me. And it's a topic that covers two things. One that I love, risk management, and the other that I can't understand why we have such a hard time with it still, vulnerability management. And there's evidently a convergence of those two worlds in the market, if you will, with the growth of the vulnerability management space taking on some risk aspects and moving more toward a proactive security posture, which the team at Omdia have been looking at a lot. And I'm thrilled to have Andrew Braunberg on. Andrew, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, great to be with you. Thank you.
And so I believe you led the research that produced the reports. I think there are probably many hands involved, but you're the one that gets to chat with me about this today.
Right. Well, happy to be here to do it. But yes, was a primary author of a recent what we call Omdia universes, which are our comparative reports. This one on risk-based vulnerability management just came out. I think it became publicly available just last week.
Perfect. I'm excited to jump on it quickly here and get people to think about what the world ahead looks like for them in their security operations and risk management programs starting today, right? They have a lot to think about today. Before we get into the report and a bunch of stuff surrounding it that I think our audience will want to hear, Andrew, maybe a few words about your role at Omdia and maybe a few highlights of your journey into that role. To kind of set the stage for what?
Yeah, I'm a principal analyst in the security operations service at Omdia. I've been over there about 18 months or so, and since I came on board, I've been mostly focusing on, what we call these proactive bits that are increasingly becoming more important for security operations teams. Before that, I had been at NSS Labs for quite a while, running their qualitative analyst arm to that traditional security testing house.
I think everybody listening knows NSS.
Yeah, right.
I hope so anyway. Well, thrilled to have you on. Let's kick it off. So I think what the report shows is there's a trend for the merging or the convergence of risk management and vulnerability management where the activities and operations perhaps are driven more by risk than just by pure figures, mean time to patch maybe. So I don't know, I probably summarized it probably not well. So I'm hoping you can kind of give us a view into what risk-based vulnerability management is, and maybe how we arrived to a point where we actually look at this now as its own market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think best to kind of start at the beginning, which would be, what we can call maybe legacy vulnerability management not doing well. What was it not keeping up with? And I would say maybe also that, we certainly view risk-based VM as kind of that next generation, that evolution. If anything, we need more vulnerability management than we did, even 10 years ago. I think we're all familiar with the big three players there. They've been around now for decades. Most of them kind of coming in the market, kind of focused on that visibility aspect of having sensors. They gave them a feel for the assets within the organization, and then obviously doing the vulnerability scanning to understand what some of the exposures might be. The problem was kind of twofold for why we're kind of moving to this risk-based approach. One was the sheer volume of CVEs, right? If you look at the National Vulnerability Database, we're up around 200,000 registered software vulnerabilities. The rate of growth has really kind of accelerated in the last 5 or 6 years. And so you're left with this, that your bucket of things to worry about has been getting bigger and bigger. And the usual way that folks would try to prioritize often was just based on that CVSS, right? That security score that's going to be attached, and often not even the full CVSS score. And we can kind of get into some of that, but more just that base score, right? And so then if you're just putting this into a spreadsheet and filtering by CVSS score, you still got a lot to do every day, right? So your ability to keep up and to really understand, is that really the best metric for me to decide whether I should tackle this, in cycle, out of cycle? I mean, there's a lot of risk, as we know, associated with some of this patch activity as well. So what these risk-based guys came in and started doing, and there's now that market's probably easily a couple dozen vendors, and certainly those traditional vulnerability guys have been moving in this direction as well, is to look for a better way. Well, let me back up. I mean, one is that prioritization bit. The other is that we're no longer in that environment where maybe a couple well-placed network scanners are really going to give you that full visibility into your digital domain, right? So we've got the one question of how do we understand our complete digital landscape? And then, how do we make sure we can prioritize what action would best reduce risk given everything on our plate, right? And so it's interesting. You see that most of these newer guys that come in are not so interested in developing their own scanner technologies. They just want to be open to pulling in a lot of this telemetry that now is available from a lot of other security and other controls, right? And all the emphasis has really been around this idea of figuring out how to best prioritize what the risk associated with each vulnerability on each particular asset is. And so I don't know if that's a short, quick description of what they're doing, but let me stop there and see if that made sense at least.
I love it. And I've not done it. I've done a lot of things, but I've not been an analyst sitting there trying to patch stuff that comes in. So I don't know the pain. I can only imagine how immense it might be having a full list every day to come to work to. So that's not fun. But if I can get a risk-based view with a vision or some context and some insight into how this impacts operations, how this impacts business, and how my work then can help protect the business, I think it becomes more interesting as an analyst. But then also, I'm presumably focusing on things that really matter, which ultimately helps the business. And it isn't just for purposes of saying, you got me this budget, I've patched X number of things, I'm doing a good job. Right.
Yeah, you hit a couple really important pieces there around context and value, right? And if we can shift this conversation to one of verifiable risk reduction, then having a conversation about ROI becomes a little more straightforward, right? But the context really comes in two main buckets, but one of them is that if we go back to thinking about CVSS and how they think about these additional pieces beyond severity associated with the actual vulnerability, you've either got an environmental piece or a temporal piece, right? And the environmental would get into very specifically asset criticality, and that gets to business value, right? Some assets are just worth protecting more than other assets. And if you have a really firm understanding of asset criticality, then understanding impact of risk is a lot easier. Even if you don't put an actual quantitative, like assign a number to it, it still helps you relatively to determine if something should be prioritized over something else just based on that. And then the temporal bit is also something that these guys are spending just a huge amount of time on. And the main kind of bit of a threat intelligence around, something new is exploit code, right? So when you're thinking about prioritization, if a CVE has not been exploited yet in the wild and there's no sign of that, then that gives you a pretty good feel that might be something you could defer or maybe ignore for a little while. And so just understanding those two bits of data really give you, I think, if you've got that in your head, you've got a pretty high level view of how these guys would attack the problem and think about prioritization based on the very latest current threat landscape and the specifics of your business that you're trying to run and protect.
So thousands of questions in my head. I'm just thinking about how, like, things like, do you actually have an attack path open in your environment that can be exploited? Do you work with things like MITRE ATT&CK and other programs? So maybe I want to stick kind of to maybe the outside threat. We know there are vulnerabilities. We know there are exploits, how active they are. We know what they go after. We know we have intelligence on what industries they're targeting at the moment, that kind of stuff. How, you mentioned in the context of telemetry. So what's possible now that may not have been a few years ago, because we have XYZ sources of information to now ingest and digest and come up with the externally based story?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of telemetry, I think, that certainly hadn't been consolidated previously. So part of this whole value add of these products is, again, bringing together this wealth of information. But really when you talk to these vendors and they're showing off these products, really the secret sauce for a lot of them is really around that understanding of what's being exploited today. And that can, be them getting into GitHub and looking around. I mean, they've got different ways they go and try to figure that out. But it's to the point where, and some of these guys have been around for a while now, but there's kind of been this constant back and forth between, is the real secret sauce in their ability for model building, so their analytics, some advanced analytics. Many of them are using some, artificial intelligence, ML kind of things, not the generative stuff that's been all the buzz this year, but just the old school, let's build some predictive models kind of thing. Is that what's really the differentiator for our product, or is it really our ability to, again, be able to pull in all this threat information and just to make better predictions there? So that I think what we're seeing in the market today, particularly since First Org has now come out with this EPSS, which is this exploit prediction scoring system, the analytics of it start to become a little bit commoditized, and it really becomes a question of being able to understand, again, that if the first toggle, and you can do this with decision trees too, right? Which is something else we can talk about, but that could be maybe the first decision point is whether, codes have been exploited or not, and not even use these models at all. Just do it with a few steps through a decision tree. But that really is kind of the key bit in the question right now around that understanding of the threat landscape, more so than your ability to really bring deep analytics to the problem.
So bringing it inside now. So let's say we have a good view, a way to kind of shed the noise, understand what's valuable from the external perspective. How do some of these vendors then shift to help teams recognize what's important to their environment or to their industry, perhaps, and their environment, given that some things are in the data center, like legacy systems, old Win95, whatever it might be, right? How do they help get that view to kind of wrap that picture up with a nice bow?
Yeah, and this is kind of really a tricky part for the security teams too, because remember, if the recommendation is really one of remediation through patch, the security team's dealing with another team within the organization that they need to convince, that this is an action that's worth taking. And so really, and it's another good reason around that model building to make sure there's transparency in the way that you're delivering this information, right? So you're presenting the score. Often it's just a number. And there's no rhyme or reason in the way the vendors kind of, it could be 0 to 10, it could be 0 to 100, it could be a credit score looking number that goes up to 850, So you're already having to explain kind of generally what the bounds around this, so how significant this risk score is. But then you've really got to you've got to be able to make the case to whoever that asset owner is, or that the person that owns that maintenance, that this needs to be done. And that's much easier, again, with some transparency, and becomes easier as you start building wins that you're making recommendations that make sense. Your only alternative here now, and this gets to your kind of attack path comment earlier, is to think about maybe some temporary mitigations that might be available given the current controls that are in place. But I can tell you one thing about these RBVM guys as a whole, their visibility into attack paths and existing controls is not great. That's an area where I think kind of, almost universally they're falling down. Compared to what you could think of an ideal that would really be much more helpful for doing remediations.
Yeah, I can see as much telemetry in that seems like they've been focused on and doing well at. You'd want the same partnerships on the inside with the AppSec, the SecOps, the DevOps.
Yeah, well, that not to keep, it's hard. Everything you mentioned, I'm like, oh yeah, probably should have mentioned
No,
that. That's cool. On the AppSec side, that is one of the things these guys are all doing a better job. So, we've been talking about CVEs, about known vulnerabilities in production code, but most of these guys have all moved to also be able to work, do that shift left into dev environments, and to be able to do pretty much the same thing for code that's not in production yet, and that it gets to this bigger conversation around not just shifting left, but also an expansion of what we mean by vulnerability, right? And so you'll see some of these guys kind of changing their go-to-market messaging into exposure management, right? Which can include misconfigurations, include credential issues, etc. And again, if you're going to prioritize risk and say you've got the next best action for risk reduction, you need to have that broader view, both from the universe of assets out there and all the exposures that they might be bringing risk to your organization. So that's another big trend that's going on right now as well.
Yeah, and I mean, this might be controversial, maybe just the way I asked the question, but it's a point I often make on almost every show that if we just do something different from the beginning, it almost always boils down to patch management. Funny enough, if we always do something different, we can save the patch team so much headache because we're not deploying a system that's always vulnerable. We're not deploying a code stack or a set of API calls that are always vulnerable. This team is just always overwhelmed because of the choices we make and the cloud services, the app stack, whatever it is that we're deploying, right? So my controversial question to you is, are we just kind of adding to an existing way of tackling this problem and expanding? And are we missing the point in how we manage vulnerabilities? Almost to, and you touched on a little bit with the AppSec piece. If we can, and it goes back to the DevOps and the IT ops, kind of feeding them to say, if you build the environment and you build the apps this way from the beginning, we actually save time versus trying to do all these weird calculations to then tell a story of why you have to fix what you broke in the first place. So long question.
Yeah, no, I think I get your drift. And, I guess I would say we got to start somewhere with trying to build this proactive mentality, right? And honestly, I mean, I think it's interesting watching the shift over the last 10 years or so. Probably we could go back. We can probably give MITRE ATT&CK kind of some of the credit there for just getting people to be thinking about, those pre-breach steps, right? Oh yeah, there are some things going on here, which if I had a little more visibility, right? But yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, as far as perfect world, but I think we can start making that shift. You're seeing so much consolidation of these tools and between the traditional AppSec and the cloud tools as well, because just so much dev gets done for cloud platforms. I think that consolidation will be helpful in driving your point that, there is an earlier time that this really just brings so much more value, obviously, which I think is the point you're making, and certainly a point I agree with. But that said, I mean, we've got billions of lines of code that are out there now that, we need to keep maintaining until we get to that better point.
Yeah. No, I'm always, as I was thinking of a circle, maybe we do have to go around the circle, but I'm like, can we not just cut across?
Yeah, I hear you.
But so this is where we are, and things are changing, and with change in products, and actually I want to ask you, are these products, services offered? Because if I look back in time, the best way to find these weaknesses were through penetration tests, where you'd hire a team and come in and they'd look for them, and then eventually you got to do your own, and then that's why we're stuck with, well, I can't do all this list, I don't know what's important. So now we have these tools to help us prioritize now with risk. Is it still, have we moved closer to self-serve, and do these tools enable companies to do it themselves?
Yeah, I think
they'll have to offer services. What's the state of that?
Yeah, I think if we're talking about risk-based vulnerability management generally, then yes, we're in a better place. Again, I mean, we can argue about the level of real visibility into the attack surface, but for the telemetry you're bringing in, it's very much kind of a dashboard productized, the analyst can get a grip, push those, none of these guys also, which I don't think I mentioned, are really interested in building their own ticket systems or even patch systems, right? It's like, ServiceNow ticket, Jira ticket. That's what those guys want to work in anyway. So, we're just like a realization that, you get outside the IT group, you better, use, or the security group, you better use the tools that these other teams want to use. Now, that would be specific to RBVM. If we just take a step up though and get into some of those other areas around security control validation and attack path validation, then I hear that what you're saying, resonates from a pain perspective better for me, in the sense that, trying to move, we've got all these terms that people are using around continuous automated red teaming and pen testing as a service. You've got all the BAS vendors still, how much of that simulation, how much, heavy lifting is that? Is there a professional services, component? How much? All of those vendors are kind of moving into a more consolidated. It's what Omdia calls. I know every analyst has. Apologies for the acronyms. We call it IST, which is incident, simulation, and testing. We certainly see consolidation among those guys, just like we do, like we were talking around exposure management being that bigger bucket than just traditional, let's say, legacy VM, but it's growing out in left. And so I think there's a lot of work going into trying to further productize in that other, what we call the IST bucket, and that I think is a heavier lift. Because to your point, it's hard. It is hard to productize a pen test, right? I mean, but there is a lot of energy going in over there to try to do that. And once you get those bundles around, again, security control validation and attack path validation, that bundle of capabilities could really be an important addition to this other kind of bundle of technology, which is, let's call it exposure management, for lack of another better term right now. And then you really have, when you're really thinking about risk reduction and your options for remediation or mitigation, I think you've got a really good view of what's going on in the enterprise.
Yeah. And I think that view becomes possible, obviously. The question I have is, how does that change multiple layers of the security program, from the teams responsible for patching? Do they need to reskill on certain things, from the management team and how they manage the team down with that in mind? Also in terms of up, to show that they're producing the results and meeting the expectations. And then even from security leadership to, we're talking risk here. So how does that technical story then ultimately translate up into the business story around risk? So how do teams need to think differently and prepare for this shift themselves across people, process, and other tech, as you mentioned, integrations and other stuff?
That's the big, right? Process and people are always tougher, than the technology. I guess there's a couple ways to answer that. One is, we are just predicting this shift in spend. If we've again got the traditional preventative bucket around, AV and firewalls and everything else that kind of tried to stand in front of your solutions, and then all the reactive stuff that we all know and love around detection and response, none of those investments are going away, or those, future investments. What we're saying is, we should try to change the conversation to one again of thinking about return on investment, in that if risk reduction is your metric there, instead of just, mean time to response, or, we need a better method for figuring out what's working. And we think proactive really lends itself to those kind of conversations. And particularly as we move this conversation up into other, comparatively with other types of enterprise risk, right? And so I think from an operational perspective, certainly, for the next couple of years, I don't think there has to be a lot of pain for any of these groups. Again, we're going to be pushing out these recommendations through the usual channels. Folks aren't having to learn a lot of new capabilities or use new tools outside of the, this probably the SOC. But we probably need to shift our thinking. And if you look at the largest organizations right now, I think this is already happening, where you kind of just take a step back and you say, we really do need to kind of reassess how we approach cyber risk. And the shift to a dedicated, cyber risk team starts making more sense when all these tools are in place. And you can kind of make the argument that you do really have a holistic view of what your risk profile is, at least, within the cyber realm. And so I see more of a kind of need for change as you kind of move up out of those, operational areas. And then, of course, you want to be able to make the case that you do have a view that allows the quantification of risk at some point, right? Which allows you to really have more of that board level conversation about what the actual cost of any of these risks would be. Those are all longer term. They're actually, I think, going to be harder to do because, again, I really do think at the operational levels we've been mostly talking about, building trust is something you're just going to do. It's either going to work or it's not. You're going to, these guys are going to take your advice or they're not. But it's kind of a day-to-day thing where you see value in it or you don't. Kind of that top-down approach to me is really I've always thought that was going to be a tougher sell, and to be able to, kind of be able to defend some of those ideas. So, bring it up from the bottom up, get to the point where we really can, reasonably attach an impact figure, put a dollar figure on that impact. And now you get into where your CISO can get in there and really have an informed conversation about how this risk compares to the other business risks that, at the CEO level, they're having to make those decisions about spend.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it gets unwieldy and complicated because I'm picturing in some of the largest organizations a risk management organization and a chief risk officer who looks at everything from physical to cyber to data to whatever, right? Ecology, geography, political, all those risks come bundling under. And I would expect them to kind of look for and pull up this information versus the bottom up that you described. So maybe the majority of organizations don't have that maturity level yet. And it's really the CISO kind of presenting this risk to a group that cares about the risk and maybe doesn't have a formal operational arm for it yet. I want to switch to kind of, we talked a little bit about what some changes might be necessary to get the most out of this new capability. I'm wondering, are there organizations that are more prime to leverage RBVM and maybe some that it's too early for them? I don't know, are there attributes that say you're in a good spot, go for it? Or if you haven't got this addressed yet, you're going to be wasting your time and money?
Yeah, no, I think, it helps if you're large enough to have ServiceNow or, some of those operational tools in place. That's for sure. But all of our research in Omdia, just shows broad, current deployment for generally vulnerability management solutions. So I think, that expertise is in place. These are just tools, that you upgrade to. They could even augment some of those historic tools for sure. And I think, what our research certainly shows, across industries and pretty far down market, that these are probably tools you're going to be able to take immediate value from, because again, the other thing our research shows is that, visibility isn't necessarily the biggest problem now. It's figuring out, it's that alert overload, if you're talking about the detection and response side, or just an inability to know, what to do next. It's not that you don't have enough to do. And these tools are really geared to just to helping you figure out what to do next.
Right. Interesting. I've read some research that organizations in general are moving. They're not ditching efficiency gains in their transformations, but they're looking more toward innovation and return gains, less than over efficiency gains. But it seems like security is kind of still struggling with the efficiency piece of things.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just doing another report on security orchestration and automation tools, SOAR tools, and I don't cover those day to day like I do some of these other pieces in SecOps. But the research that came back, just kind of struck me. I just had assumed, the number one value there was that one of productivity. I mean, just automating and orchestrating. I mean, it's right in the name, right? I mean, isn't that what people are looking for? But by far, the view was that increased accuracy was the main benefit here. And it just kind of, when you stop and you think, some of this rote stuff, just doesn't get done correctly because it's just, you're under the gun doing it. The
humans get in the way.
Exactly.
No, I love it. I didn't mean to stop you there, but it's fascinating. I think, I love this world of risk management and security operations, and obviously there's a lot of stuff that goes into making those things work. And so we just talked about kind of getting to current state. There's this a burgeoning world of RBVM that's going to change. What's the future like? It's nothing static, right? So what do you see in the next couple of years?
No, absolutely not. We really do. We're to the point where now looking at all these different folks kind of heading, they're all, they're coming from different angles, but they're heading all where the puck's going here. And so we think further consolidation across some of these different categories that we've been talking about into proactive security platforms. So very much trying to productize and bring this all together into that kind of, all the usual single pane of glass, holistic view of visibility. We haven't talked as much about the attack surface management pieces, but that external bit is just so critical and so much as far as some of that attack path, particularly. And then, it's also the other side of that. A lot of people will call the chasm side, just that ability to really inventory your full asset universe, or just kind of really foundational across all of these areas now. And then you add on that these risk management analytics that we've been talking about. That gives you kind of a foundation where all these things can sit and create, additional value. And we haven't even talked about the fact that, the Reactive Suite guys are all, moving in this direction as well. So you've seen acquisitions from guys like Palo Alto, IBM. You see a trend doing kind of similar things. It's all kind of bundling up.
I love it. It's a never-ending fun story to watch.
Yeah.
Watch it unfold. If my co-founder Marco is on with me, he's like, we're at the mark, and I always say I have one more question, so I'm going to do it here in the guise of the future. Answer it to your best ability. Digital sovereignty. I see a lot of movement to keeping data resident in country, and I'm wondering, not just for RBVM, certainly for that, but how does that, do you think, impact how we see some of these shifts, both in terms of how vendors approach the markets and how organizations leverage one or more technologies?
Yeah. I don't know that I've got a ready answer for sovereignty on this. Certainly it's always an overlay. I'm kind of trying to think. Yeah, I'm not sure. I've got a really good. So maybe my thought is it's not going to be a primary determinant here on how this all unfolds, because we're not really talking about. Yeah, well, what can I say? Sorry, Sean.
No, that's good. No, I don't either. No, because I think sovereignty kind of plays two roles, right? There's the privacy aspect of all the regulations, but then there's we don't want to be subject to other people's stuff.
No, we could take a broader, but I don't think there's a short answer, which is rolling this up into GRC systems, right? And just thinking generally about governance, compliance, and risk, and how that all is going to happen. But that's probably a whole other conversation. So at some point, it'll.
I think it would be. Well, if you start to hear rumblings, I'd be more than happy to have you and others from Omdia join me to.
Sure thing.
Have that chat. Who knows? Maybe there's something fun there.
Yep.
But anyway, this is fantastic. I could talk to you for hours, Andrew.
I appreciate the invite.
Anytime we get into risk.
Right.
You've been incredible. So
thank you.
Thank you so much. And for those listening, or watching, I appreciate you joining us today. And hopefully we shed some light on some things happening in the vuln management space and where things are headed, where they are now, and how that impacts your teams. And I'll ask Andrew if there are any resources he wants to share that would help folks kind of get a better picture for what's going on here. We'll include those.
Yeah, the risk-based vulnerability management Omdia universe is available. You just have to, fill out the form online. It's probably omdia.com is a good place to go find that. Certainly a Google search. That would be a good one if people really want to kind of see what that comparative looks like and see some of the vendors that we're working with. That's a good start.
Perfect. Love it. All right, Andrew, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Please share with others you think would benefit from this. And of course, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.
Pantera, the leader in automation security validation, allows organizations to continuously test the integrity of all cybersecurity layers by emulating real-world attacks at scale to pinpoint the exploitable vulnerabilities and prioritize remediation towards business impact. Learn more at pantera.io.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Redefining Security Podcast. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.